to Geopost and to the embassy for the previous panels, which were somber and discouraging and a tough act to follow. So I will try to be brief, but also perhaps enlightening. And I know that I'm standing between you and a break, so I'll also try to be efficient. This is me. I always like to start our presentations by just telling you a little bit about me, because my background in coming to this work is a little bit unusual. So I'm actually trained as a historian. I began my career working in museums. I used to work at a Holocaust museum in New York City called the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. My grandparents were Holocaust survivors. My mother was actually born in a displaced person camp in Poland, Germany after the war. So Holocaust history, Jewish history, very important to me personally and professionally. So I actually began my career working on museum exhibits about Holocaust history in New York City. I then actually went on to work for a number of different museums, including the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, if anyone's familiar with that. Eventually, I worked at the U.S. Library of Congress. Has anybody been to the Library of Congress? People have heard of the Library of Congress?
Sure.
Okay. The Library of Congress is the largest library in the world. It currently has 175 million items in the collection. I then was the founding director of something called the LePage Center for History and the Public Interest, and these days I'm a global fellow at the Wilson Center and adjunct professor at the Maxwell School in Washington, D.C. I am affiliated with the State Department. I don't work for the State Department. I work as a contractor for the department doing diplomatic exchanges. I've now done 5 of them in Europe on questions around disinformation and media literacy, and I'm an author of a book, which I'm going to tell you a little bit about. So, why am I giving you all this background information? Well, I've always been very interested in how people learn about the past, whether they learn about it inside a museum gallery, whether they learn about it inside the Library of Congress, and increasingly, people learn about the past on social media and on their phones. So I kind of asked myself a very simple question, which is, what does this mean? What does it mean to try to learn history from your phone? Can you even learn history from your phone? And how do these devices that we hold in our hands shape the histories that we know and the histories that we see, and also the histories that we don't know and the histories that we don't see? And it is through that I've gotten into this work around social media, misinformation, disinformation, media literacy, and how our phones and these algorithms that dictate what we see are actually shaping the world around us on a daily basis. So this is the Library of Congress, where I used to work. I actually used to work right down the hall from here. And Library of Congress is a great place to think big thoughts about the world, to think about these questions. And what was amazing to me when I worked at the Library of Congress is part of our job at the Library of Congress is to advise Congress. So we meet with U.S. members of Congress all the time, and we try to get them in conversation with the scholars that we have in residence, right? As I mentioned, the library has 175 million items in its collection. You could walk into the library and see an entire room full of books on just one subject. With all of that wisdom and knowledge collected inside the Library of Congress, it was amazing to me how many members of Congress and their staff were relying on their phones to get information, right? The information that they would see in their Twitter feeds or their Instagram feeds or on Wikipedia would dictate and shape the way they voted, the way they saw the world, the way they made policy decisions, more than the 175 million items inside the Library of Congress. So to me, this seemed like a big disconnect. And it seemed like a theory and an exploration worthy of uncovering more about it. I have a lot of slides which I'm going to skip because for time. But I was working at the Library of Congress in the 2010s, around 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16 time period. And it was during that time that I also began to notice how much history content was appearing on social media. History content such as this. Now this is a video that was on YouTube. It's obviously an American example, but of course there are examples from any number of different contexts and countries for the people represented here in this room. But this video about the American Civil War, which came out in 2015 on YouTube, This video accumulated somewhere in the range of 30 to 40 million views on YouTube. Now, to put that into perspective, right? If I told you that I wrote a book, 95% of all books never sell more than 1,000 copies. So if I was to write a book about the American Civil War, or write an article about the American Civil War, probably most people would not read it or even see it. But a video about the American Civil War can get 35 to 40 million views online. So it seemed to me that something was going on here, something very significant. And of course, it wasn't just videos about the American Civil War that were popping up online. It was all kinds of information about history that was appearing on all kinds of different social media sites, whether it be Facebook or Instagram or even places like WhatsApp. Now, we all know that there's a lot of information on social media, but I feel like it's sometimes helpful to see it represented graphically. This graphic is a little bit hard to see right now, so I apologize. Sometimes when I can present, I can blow this up. But this is from 2018, so this graphic is already 5-6 years old. But in 2018 time period, YouTube users were watching 4.3 million videos every minute of every day. 4.3 million videos of every minute of every day. When I talk to students, I always tell them to take out their phones and their calculators and multiply 4.3 million videos by 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks in a year. It's a number that is so big that it actually breaks the calculator. You can't come up with a number. It's like something to the 11th power, right? It's a huge category of content online. Similarly, here on this graphic, which again, I apologize, it's hard to see, on Twitter users in 2018 were tweeting 473,000 tweets every minute of every day. So it's a huge category of content online, tons of information flowing across social media. And my question was, how much of this is content about history? How much of this is content that purports to teach you something about the past? It turns out it's very hard to get an accurate number, but there are some researchers in Germany that we've been working with to try to figure this out. So on TikTok, which is not on this graphic, but will be on the graphic I'll show you next, on TikTok, anybody want to guess how many videos have the hashtag history? 58 billion. And that was last year. So it's well over 100 billion now. On Instagram, anybody want to guess? 50 million videos. And that's just with the hashtag history, let alone covering subjects in history. So this is a huge category of content. It is shaping how people understand the past. And of course, we all know in this room why this matters. It's already been brought up several times. The speaker from Austria brought it up, I thought, very eloquently, right? Ideas about the past shape the present and the future. What we think about the past matters. How we frame conflicts in the past matters. Tactics that were used in the past matter. All of this information about history is shaping the way people view the world. It increasingly is coming from platforms such as this, right? So, that's why I wrote the book. The book is about how social media is shaping and changing what we know about history. The first draft was in 2019, second draft 2020, third draft 2021. The book came out in 2022. It's amazing it's been out for 2 years already. It's still very relevant. This is the 185th talk I've given about the book. So I've been on the road speaking about the book for the past 2 years straight. The book has been all over the place. Some of you may have actually read it. And here is the updated version of the graphic that I promised to show you. TikTok is now on here. This is again from 2023, so it's old. On TikTok, users watch 167 million videos every minute of every day. 167 million videos every minute of every single day are watched on TikTok. If you do that math, it's a huge number, right? And this is why the conversations about content moderation are a red herring. Okay, this is a very important point. The platforms want us to be arguing about content moderation because they know that content moderation is impossible. It is impossible to moderate 167 million videos every single minute of every single day effectively, right? You would have to get transcripts of all those videos. You'd have to then analyze the context and the text of all those you have to then run through some sort of content moderation system, which constantly has to be changing and updated based on situations in the world. So it is really an impossible problem to solve, which is why platforms like Facebook and TikTok love it when we argue about it, because it actually prevents us from arguing about the structural issues that make social media happen. But, you know, on Instagram, for example, users are sharing 65,000 photos every single minute of every single day. And again, a huge category of this is history content, huge categories are political content, news content, science content, right? So this is sort of the world that I operate in and trying to figure out why all this content, not only why it exists and who's creating it, but why does certain content become visible? And why does it become influential? Right? If you're creating 167 million TikTok videos every single day, most of those videos are not getting seen. Most of those videos are not influencing people, but a very small selection are. Same with Twitter, same with Instagram. Why are certain pieces of content on these platforms shaping people's views so much? And why is there some content that people will never ever see? Now, I'm interested in that question when it comes to history, but that can be applied to any number of different issues, including science and politics and geopolitics. So let's dig into why that is and what I figured out. First of all, moving forward, for my book's purposes and for history's purposes, I'm going to use the term e-history to describe this phenomenon. I have a whole section of my talk and a whole section in the book where I talk about e-history. I give you a definition of it. We don't have time for that today. So just take my word for it. It's a good word. There's a good definition. It's on the first page of the book if you want to check it out. Okay, so moving forward, we have a question of why does certain history become visible online, and why does certain e-history never see the light of day? Right? There are millions and millions of pieces of e-history that are competing for our attention, trying to shape how we view the world. Why does Russian disinformation e-history do well, and the disinformation that is countering that not do well? Well, it turns out, from my research, this is my conclusion. I believe that when it comes to history, at least, there are actually very tried and true mechanisms that make e-history visible online. And actually, these mechanisms align very closely with the platforms. In other words, certain types of information seems to do very well on certain types of platforms if it leverages certain types of mechanisms. And if you can create e-history that leverages these mechanisms, then you stand a high chance of visibility and influence on social media. And if your content does not leverage these mechanisms effectively, then chances are no one will see your content and it will have no influence on it. So let's break this down a little bit, and we don't have time to go over all. The first one in the book I talk about is the crowdsourced past, right? This is a very easy one to grasp. The web and social media have been built with certain assumptions. One of those assumptions is the more people who are looking at something or talking about something, the more visibility that piece of content should have. Right? This is a tried and true across the web. Okay? So, what do disinformation campaigns do? We heard about it in the first panel. They get lots of fake accounts and phony accounts and bot accounts or whatever, troll accounts, to pretend to simulate like they are a crowd, to simulate that they are lots of different people looking at something, and by using the very mechanics of how the web was built, they use that crowdsourcing to rise things to the top of the feed and allow it to spill over to other platforms. Right? So on a platform like Reddit, for example, which works on the idea of upvoting, you get a crowd of people to upvote a certain piece of information. Once it gets to the top of the feed, then it spills over into Telegram, it spills over into Facebook, and eventually spills over into Twitter, and it becomes influential. So, crowdsourcing, very effective way to get your e-history seen, also a very effective way to get your disinformation. Let's talk about the next one on here. Nostalgia on demand. Okay? Nostalgia is a very powerful human emotion. The idea that everything was better in the past, right? It relies on ideas of history. That's why I put in my category e-history. Well, it turns out that the Facebook newsfeed was actually purposely designed to privilege nostalgia. I have a whole section in the book where I talk about it. I don't have time to talk about it here. So, if you marry the powerful emotion of nostalgia with a platform like Facebook that privileges nostalgia, then it becomes apparent why nostalgic content does very well on Facebook. And who is very good at trafficking in nostalgic content? Authoritarian dictators who would like to tell you that everything was better in the past when it was an empire, right? Everything was better in the past when it was Yugoslavia. Everything was better in the past when it was a Soviet empire. Everything was better in the past when it was Make America Great Again, 1950s, right? Nostalgia is very powerful because it absolves you from having to actually come up with any ideas in the present. You can always say that things were better in the past. And that type of content does particularly well on Facebook because Facebook itself was designed to privilege that type of content. So, if you follow these patterns, you actually start to see why certain types of disinformation that leverages history does particularly well on these platforms, and why certain narratives that were alluded to in the first panel and the second panel, are actually having so much success. Now, obviously, these narratives have success beyond social media. But one of the things that I argue in my book is actually because we use social media so much, its values have become our values. In other words, the more we use technology, the more we become like the technology, not the other way around. So social media has certain values built into it, privileging nostalgia, privileging the crowdsourced, and those values, they affect the information online, but they also affect the information offline. And so the more we use these technologies, I have argued, the less we actually learn about history, and the more we actually become like the very technologies we use. This is why I tell people, when they try to tell me that technology is just a tool that can be used for this or that, I said, no, technology is never just a tool. Technology is always embedded with values, and those values then become part and parcel of us. We become as much like the machine as the machine is dictated by the machines. Now, I have all these examples about how and why these specific types of narratives work, what platforms they leverage. Unfortunately, I don't have time to talk about that. But Gooden wanted me to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence, because that's one of the things that I talk about in the book, which came out 2 years ago, and has now become even more important in the last couple of years since ChatGPT. And I'll actually be going to Brussels in March to talk about this with your colleagues, so I hope that we'll see each other. But artificial intelligence obviously poses tremendous challenges, not just in terms of discerning what is real and what is fake, or what has been generated by a machine, but what is generated by a human. But I argue in the book that artificial intelligence is actually an acceleration of the path that we have been on for the past 20 years. In other words, tech and social media have values embedded within them that are now propagated across society because we've used these platforms so much. And artificial intelligence also has values embedded within it, that as it has quickly proliferated across the world, exceeding 100 million users faster than any other platform ChatGPT did, its values are also quickly becoming integrated into all of society. And what are some of those values that artificial intelligence has embedded within it? Well, one, it privileges efficiency and speed over everything else, right? The idea is to get the words as quickly as possible, the images as quickly as possible, the information as quickly as possible. So what does that dilute? It dilutes our critical thinking skills, it dilutes our media literacy skills, it dilutes our ability to stop and ask questions, because we're always trying to rapidly keep up with the speed of the machine. But the other thing that artificial intelligence does is it promises you that you can get answers to your questions without having to think, right? Why do I have to think to come up with words when I can just have ChatGPT do it for me? Why should I have to think to come up with images when I can just have Midjourney do it for me? Why should I have to think about writing my emails when I can just have Gmail's AI assistant do it for me? So, if you don't see this as a problem for disinformation, then I have a bridge to sell. Because thinking and critical thinking and media literacy and information literacy are, as already were mentioned, part of the toolkit and part of our skill set that we need to combat all this stuff. But yet we're rapidly introducing technology in society that dilutes the very skill that we need. So I see artificial intelligence as a huge problem, huge challenge. Now, again, I have a whole section about why e-history exists and all these other things. Unfortunately, I don't have time for that, because I only have a few minutes, and I want to make sure that I don't keep you too long. But as I mentioned, all of this history content online, 58 billion posts on TikTok, does this mean we know history any better? My conclusion from my research is no. My conclusion is that the proliferation of information about the past online does not equate to a better understanding of history, right? There's a difference between looking at information and understanding it. On social media, we look at a lot of information. I don't have a lot of evidence that we actually understand. And in fact, because we see so much of it, and because we are making so many quick decisions about it, I actually worry that we understand it increasingly less and less, and we actually don't even privilege the understanding of history all that much either, right? Because we're just so consequently, consistently focused on the present and the future. The very fragmentary nature of the history with widely varying quality and agendas, with no uniform ethics or standards, compels individuals to try and derive meaning from simplistic, controversial, pseudo-academic, and conspiratorial sources intermixed with scholarly and journalistic ones, right? None of this stuff is labeled online. So the first video that you see might be a professional historian, but the next one is a disinformation agent, the next one's a conspiracy theorist. It puts a lot of onus on the information consumer to sort it out for him or herself. All of this is compounded, by the way, with the fact that history degree programs, both in the United States and Europe, are in rapid decline. In the United States, the undergraduate degree that has declined the most is history. Yes. Fewer people are taking history classes than any other class, 33% decline. History departments are closing across the United States, and increasingly in Europe, I'm hearing too, that history departments are losing funding, losing professors, and losing students. So we have a situation where we have all of this terrible history online, we're losing our critical thinking, media literacy skills, and we're not actually investing in one of the things that can help us, which is to have thriving history and humanities departments that teach these skill sets to students. So, what do we do about all this? Well, that is why me and my colleagues have created something called the History and Communication Institute. We are committed to making the web and social media a better place for accurate information, accurate historical information, for making sure that good history rises to the top of the feed, and to ensure that there is a future of history. That there are professional historians, that there are professional museums, that we build our historical thinking skills and our critical thinking skills and our media literacy skills. We're trying to develop partnerships. I was in North Macedonia last year with my friends in the back developing a partnership. Talked with Gunnar about partnerships. So we want to be in partnership with all of you if you care about these things. Right now, our community is a global community. We have people on 6 different continents working on this. We have a Slack channel. We put out reports. We put out a report about TikTok last year. We did something about ChatGPT as well. So if you're interested, please do keep in touch with me. Those are my coordinates. My website is there. My newsletter is there. And historycommunication.com is the website for the HCI. And with that, I thank you.
Does anyone have a question for Mr. Jason?
We have about 5 minutes for questions. That's the fastest I've ever done that presentation. I usually do it in about 45 minutes to an hour.
That was really impressive. Sort of Martin coming down. It's difficult when you can hear my voice from over there, I guess. Yeah. I agree with you 100% that the moderation is impossible to do by a human. Obviously, we've seen ChatGPT and the ability to have assistance within that now, and the pace of change is so rapid. With your work on the history that you're doing, which I think is phenomenal, it's great that you're doing that. What do you see the future of AI in helping you to keep it honest and real when other actors are going to use AI to disrupt that?
Yeah, so the first point that you made, so Facebook now is pretty much trying to do all of its content moderation using artificial intelligence. They've basically given up on human content moderation. Now, for one, it's much cheaper for them to do it that way. So it's a business decision. They want to save money. And in fact, I just wrote about this in my newsletter. During the pandemic, they sent all their content moderators home, and then they never brought them back. So it was a cost-saving measure. I think the jury is very much out on whether artificial intelligence content moderation can actually be effective. There's still so much context that needs to be evaluated when you're looking at pieces of information: geopolitical context, historical context, who the poster is, and artificial intelligence is still not at the place where we can do that well. It probably will get there in the future, but right now it's not. So I suspect, and we've seen this with Twitter X, right? Content moderation is going to get worse before it gets better. In terms of how artificial intelligence will sort of fan the flames of all of this moving forward, I think with all of these technologies, there is a hype cycle. And that hype cycle wants to promise us that this technology is going to solve all of our problems. AI is going to make healthcare better. AI is going to make business better. AI is going to make education better. It never actually examines what it's going to make worse. And I suspect that one of the things it's going to make worse is writing skills, reading skills, critical thinking skills, media literacy skills. We're already seeing it in the United States where we have generations of students who can't write, can't even write an email, let alone write an essay. And so I think policymakers need to build in safeguards. They need to build in funding and budgets to support the humanities and writing skills and critical thinking skills and media literacy programs. And we need to be holding the tech companies to account when they sell us the moon to ask them, what's on the other side of that. And I think Europe is actually probably doing a little bit better job than that in the United States right now, but I think we still have a long way to go.
Any other questions?
My name is Remziya Shahini Hoja. I'm a professor of journalism at the University of Pristina.
I might see you tomorrow.
Yes, and you're going to meet my students as well.
Yeah.
So my concern is that we are losing artifacts day by day. So do you see any solution in this time of artificial intelligence? What should we do to prevent that? Because when we think of the war in Kosovo, the war in Ukraine happening now, and a lot of artifacts that we have lost throughout the time, what are we going to do? We're gonna come to a stand when we are not going to be able to prove anything that we were anywhere. Thank you.
Yeah, well, as someone who used to work in museums, this question is near and dear to my heart. The first question is there has to be funding. Nothing can be preserved without funding. Preservation is not cheap. Museums require infrastructure. They require buildings. They require climate-controlled storage. They require collections management systems. They require preservation and conservation staff. Artifacts within those museums require conservation and preservation treatments. There need to be archivists and librarians who go out and collect the material. Those people need to be paid a living wage. So all of that requires funding. In the United States right now, we have more than 21,000 history museums. The last poll survey I saw, 80% of those museums operate with a budget under $200,000. Now, $200,000 in the United States, that does not even get you 2 full-time employees. And we're asking tens of thousands of history museums to operate with that little money to save and preserve all of that history that you're talking about. So it requires funding, first and foremost, and that requires political will to come to the table and actually pass more funding legislation and have oversight to make sure that funding is used appropriately to preserve the very artifacts you're talking about. But beyond the funding, there also, I think, just needs to be a little bit more education and cultural awareness about why these artifacts are important in the first place. We have a generation, several generations now, who have come of age in a period where they believe that all the information worth knowing can be found on their screen. And we know that there's a lot of world out there that doesn't exist in a digital format. And to actually have a nuanced and deep understanding of the human experience, you need to integrate three-dimensional objects into that knowledge set. So we have an educational challenge to continue to pass on those lessons and ideas that those objects are worth saving. And then once we've told people that they're worth saving, then they need to vote for elected officials who actually make the funding possible. This was great. I'm available. I'll be here all day if you want to chat more. Thank you again to Geopost for the invitation. Please enjoy some food.